Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to discuss about the definition and scope of pedagogic grammar. So what is pedagogic grammar? Pedagogic grammar is a description of a given language which has been created, usually in written form, but more and more are electronic, with the intention of enabling a defined set of learners to learn that language. Also, pedagogical grammar is a modern approach in linguistics intended to aid in teaching an additional language. This method of teaching is divided into the descriptive, grammatical analysis, and the prescriptive, the articulation of set of rules. Following an analysis of the context in which it is to be used, one grammatical form or arrangement of words will be determined to be the most appropriate. It helps in learning the grammar of foreign languages. Pedagogical grammars typically require rules that are definite, coherent, non-technical, cumulative, and heuristic. As the rules themselves accumulate, an axiomatic system is formed between the two languages that should then enable a native speaker of the first to learn the second. Pedagogical grammar is a conception of grammar that specifically takes into account the needs of learners of a second language, distinguished from prescriptive and descriptive or linguistic grammars. Pedagogical grammars include basic and frequently used structures, chosen for their maximum relevance to students who plan to use the language for ordinary purposes, especially academic study. Published versions of pedagogical grammars, such as textbooks for learners and handbooks for teachers, typically draw upon specific theoretical orientations towards second language acquisition, language pedagogy, and linguistics.
Hello everyone. I will discussing the scope of pedagogic grammar. First, setting grammatical objectives for a syllabus, school textbook, lesson, or teaching sequence. Second, specifying grammar rules and making them available to learners by explanation, illustration, exemplification, discovery of rules by students themselves, and etc. Third, setting learning aims for a specific exercise and activities. That is to say, determining what role a particular exercise might play in enhancing learning. Fourth, methodology, which is devising and evaluating grammar exercises and activities to be given to students. And then lastly, testing grammatical competence and performance. That's all. And thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Asnifah Solaiman introducing methods and teaching grammar. English grammar is notoriously difficult to learn for both native and second language speakers. There are so many intricacies, obscure rules, and exemptions that it comes as no surprise that different generations of teachers have used various approaches to teaching grammar to train literate English writers. In the past, memorization-based techniques that relied on repetition slowly gave way to more creative methods. Today, we live in a society that prizes literacy and is willing to adapt to more effective methods to achieve the best results in teaching grammar. English language or using English grammar is very hard to those who are trained to use mother tongue language or our second language, which is the Tagalog or Filipino. That's why lots of teachers use another method in teaching students on how to learn about English grammar. The first one is Diagramming sentences. One of the older forms of teaching grammar, diagramming sentences first appeared in the 19th century. These methods involves visually mapping the structures of and relationships between different aspects of a sentence. Especially helpful for visual learners, this method disappeared from modern teaching at least 30 years ago. Different forms of diagramming are used to visualize sentences, from the Reed-Kellogg system to dependency grammar, but all organize the functions of a sentence in a way that illustrates the grammatical relationships between words. The Reed-Kellogg grammar system is a method for diagramming sentences that was commonly taught in grammar classrooms in the past. The system was introduced in the 1870s by Alonzo Reed and Brainerd Kellogg. The diagramming sentences is important to those who are visual learners. Diagramming sentences is mapping or organizing the words that shows or illustrate the grammatical relationship between words. Bale, mas madali siya ma-adapt or ma-interpret sa mga visual learners tungod kay makita nila katong ways or structure. Second one is learning through writing. This method is often used in schools in the US and Canada. Students are encouraged to explore language through creative writing and reading, picking up correct grammar usage along the way. If there are specific problems with certain grammatical rules, these are covered in a more structured lesson. An emphasis is now being placed upon language acquisition over language learning, as it has been observed that learning grammar by memorization does not work well, and that students are better able to recognize and understand grammatical rules when lessons are more interactive. Repeated practice is also important and easily achieved through creative or personal writing exercises. Tungod kay memorization, learning grammar by memorization sa una is maragwa nag-work, they resort to learning through writing, which is students are practiced, will be trained to write and write. Examples of learning through writing are the reading journal, generic and focused summaries, annotations, response papers, synthesis papers, the discussion starter, focusing a discussion, and the learning lab. For the more methods, it will be presented by Jayson Togonon.
Hello everyone, I'm Jayson Togonon and I'm going to present inductive, deductive, and interactive grammar teaching. Inductive teaching. Inductive teaching is a rule discovery approach that starts with some examples from which a rule is inferred. This method of teaching grammar involves presenting several examples that illustrate a specific concept and expecting students to notice how the concept works from these examples. And there is no explanation is given beforehand. And the expectations is that students will learn to recognize the rule of grammar in a more natural way during their own reading and writing. Discovering grammar and visualizing how these rules work in a sentence allow for easier retention of the concept than if for the students were given an explanation that was disconnected from examples of concept. For example, a teacher is having a lesson about present continuous. Teacher will first have several examples to discuss or explain that will recognize or to discover a grammar rule, then followed by worksheets and exercises. Deductive teaching. is a rule-driven approach which starts with the presentation of a rule and is followed by examples in which the rule is applied. This method of teaching grammar is an approach that focuses on instruction before practice. A teacher gives students an in-depth explanation of a grammatical concept in their own writing. After the lesson, students are expected to practice what they have just been shown in a mechanical way through worksheets and exercises. For example, we are having a topic about present continuous. Teacher will first introduce a grammar rule with provided examples to explain or to discuss to student, and then followed by worksheets and exercises. Interactive teaching is another method of teaching grammar that incorporates interactively in lessons. This method allows teachers to tailor their lessons of the different learning styles of the student. Because teaching methods have evolved substantially over the last decades in all fields, from primary schools to universities. Classroom teaching has undergone a huge shift from teacher-centered to learner-centered learning. And rather than considering learning as a process by which knowledge is transferred from the teacher to the student, learning now is understood as a co-creative process in which students and teachers are actively engaged. Interactive teaching methods are therefore less about the specific techniques than about the teaching philosophy behind them. So interactive teaching is the teacher mixes inductive and deductive approach, writing down the key points which will serve as a useful aid during the following sections of the class, telling the objectives of the lesson. Then, to illustrate rules and examples, teacher will ask students some guided questions to operate interactive approach.
Good day, everyone. Today I'm going to discuss the history of language teaching. In the history of language teaching, Latin was the dominant language of education, commerce, religion, and government in the Western world. In 1501 to 1700s, children entering grammar school in England were initially given a rigorous introduction to Latin grammar, which was taught through rote learning of grammar rules, study of declensions and conjugations, translation and practice in writing sample sentences, sometimes with the use of parallel bilingual texts and dialogue. Teaching methodology. The different teaching approaches and methods have in common belief that if language learning is to improve, it will come about through changes and improvements in teaching methodology. As modern languages began to enter the curriculum of European schools in 18th century, they were taught using the same basic procedures that were used for teaching Latin. Textbooks are consisted of statements of abstract grammar rules, lists of vocabulary, and sentences for translation. During that time, speaking a foreign language was not the goal, and oral practice was limited to students reading about the sentences they had translated. The Latin grammar in 1500s, Roger Ashman and Montagna had made specific proposals for curriculum and for changes in the way Latin was taught. F. Franca, 1884, the German scholar, wrote on the psychological principles of direct association between forms and meanings in the target language, provided a theoretical justifications for a monolingual approach to teaching. Language teaching innovations in the 19th century. The Frenchman C. Marcel, 1793 to 1896, referred to child language learning as a model for language teaching, emphasized the importance of meaning in learning, proposed that reading be taught before other skills, and tried to locate language teaching within a broader educational framework. As Marcel taught the child language learning, Englishman T. Pendergast was one of the first to record the observation that children use contextual and situational cues to interpret utterance, and that they use memorized phrases and routines in speaking. He proposed the first structural syllabus, advocating that learners be taught the most basic structural pattern occurring in the language. Meanwhile, Frenchman F. Gouin, perhaps the best known of this century reformers, developed an approach to teaching a foreign language based on his observations of children's use of language. He believed that language learning was facilitated through using language to accomplish events consisting of a sequence of related actions. The Reform Movement. Language teaching specialists like Marcel, Pendergast, and Gouin had done much to promote alternative approaches to language teaching, but their ideas failed to receive widespread support or attention. From the 1880s, however, practically minded linguists like Henry Sweet in England, Wilhelm Viator in Germany, and Paul Passy in France began to provide the intellectual leadership needed to give reformist ideas greater credibility and acceptance. Sweet's book, The Practical Study of Languages, set forth principles for the development of teaching method. This includes careful selections of what is to be taught, imposing limits on what is to be taught, arranging what is to be taught in terms of the four skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and grading materials from simple to complex. In Germany, the prominent scholar Wilhelm Viator used linguistic theory to justify his views on language teaching. He argued that training in phonetics would enable teachers to pronounce the language accurately.
Good morning. I'm Cristina Rivera, and my topic is History of Language Teaching. International Phonetic Association was founded, and its International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA, was designed to enable the sounds of any language to be accurately transcribed. Sinclair Hypothesis, 1991. In his famous idiom principle, Sinclair also underscores the important role idioms, or formulaic sequences, play in discourse. As he concludes, the overwhelming nature of this evidence leads us to elevate the principle of idiom from being rather minor feature compared with grammar to being at least as important as grammar in the explanation of how meaning arises in text. Lambert Sauveur. Lambert, who used intensive oral interaction in the target language, employing questions as a way of presenting and eliciting language. Language teaching must start afresh, 1882. Viator published his views in an influential pamphlet, Language Teaching Must Start Afresh, in which he strongly criticized the inadequacies of grammar translations, stress, and the value of training teachers in the new science of phonetics. Applied Linguistics, 1904. Applied linguistics systemized the principles proposed earlier by the Reform movement and laid the foundations for what developed into the British approach to teaching English as a foreign language. Providing intellectual leadership, 1880. Practically minded linguists such as Henry Sweet in England, Willem Vitor in Germany, and Paul Passy in France began to provide the intellectual leadership needed to give reformist ideas greater credibility and acceptance. Harry Sweet Proposal, 1845. Harry Sweet argued that some methodological principles should be based on a scientific analysis of language and a study of psychology. Morphology and Syntax, 1901. Textbook compilers were mainly determined to decodify the foreign language into frozen rules of morphology and syntax to be explained and eventually memorized. Grammar translation method. Grammar translation dominated European and foreign language teaching and in modified form and continues to be widely used in some parts of the world today. The principal characteristics of the grammar translations method were these. The goal of the foreign language study is to learn a language in order to read its literature or in order to benefit from the mental discipline and intellectual development that result from foreign language study. Communicative approach. These decades saw the emergence of the audiolingual method and situational method, which were both superseded by the communicate approach. During the same period, others method attracted smaller but equally enthusiastic followers, including the silent way, the natural approach, and the total physical response. Roger Brown's frustration. The Harvard psychologist Roger Brown has documented similar problems with the strict direct method techniques. He describes his frustration in observing a teacher performing verbal gymnastics in an attempt to convey the meaning of Japanese words, when translation would have been a much more efficient technique to use. Move belief. Many applied linguistics and language teachers move away from a belief that newer, better approaches and methods are the solution to problems in language teaching. Implementing schools and colleges. The European popularity of the direct method caused foreign language specialists in the United States to attempt to have it implemented in American schools and colleges, although they decided to move with caution. A study on the same state of language, foreign language, teaching concluded that no single method could guarantee successful results. That would be all. Thank you.
So, under the history of language teaching is direct method. In 1970, the use of the direct method in non-commercial schools in Europe had consequently declined. In France and Germany, it was gradually modified into versions that combined some direct method techniques and more controlled grammar-based activities. First language teaching in 1980, the direct method can be regarded as the first language teaching method to have caught the attention of teachers and language teaching specialists, and it offered a methodology that appeared to move language teaching into a new era. So, rise and fall of language teaching in 1983, this decade saw the rise and fall of a variety of language teaching approaches and methods. The most active period in the history of approaches and methods is from 1950 to 1980. Then ang input hypothesis, 1985, people often associate CLT with a strictly no grammar approach,
epitomized by Krashen's input hypothesis. Then in access methodology in 1988, the most principled attempt to develop a coherent approach for the promotion of formalic sequences has been made by Gatbonton and Sigalowitz. Their proposed methodology is called ACCESS, standing for Automation in Communicative Context of Essential Speech Segments. And it offers a principled adaptation of communicative language teaching that aims to generate fluency by drawing on the theories of automation and formalic language. Then a new approaches in 1990, content-based instruction and task-based language teaching emerged as new approaches to language teaching, as did movements such as competency-based instruction that focus on the outcomes of learning rather than methods of teaching. Then in 1990, the classic communicative language teaching. In the 1970s, a reaction to traditional language teaching approaches began and soon spread around the world as older methods such as audiolingualism and situational language teaching fell out of fashion. The centrality of grammar in language teaching learning was questioned, since it was argued that more language ability involved much more than grammatical competence. Then in current communicative language teaching in 1990 to 2017, within the last quarter century, communicative language teaching or CLT has been put forth around the world as the new or innovative way to teach English as a second or foreign language. In teaching materials, course descriptions, and curriculum guidelines proclaim a goal of communicative competence. Then, the 21st Century Skills 2016. The 21st Century Skills can be summarized by the 4 C's: the communication, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and natural method. Then 1860 to 1920, Elsevier opened a language school in Boston, and his method soon became referred to as the natural method. Then ang oral communication skills in graded progression, communicative exchanges between student-teacher, grammar taught inductively. A study concluded that in 1923, no single method could guarantee successful results. Conversational skills were impractical in view of restricted time. Limited skills of the teachers' relevance of conversational skills for average American students.
Hi everyone, good day. Today we will be discussing about the theories of second language acquisition. There are lots of theories you can find and theories you can learn about second language acquisition. But today we will just focus on Krashen's theory of second language acquisition. So, but first, before we will jump to the content of this theory, let us first know who is Krashen. So, Stephen Krashen is an expert in the field of linguistics, specializing in theories of language acquisition and development. So basically, he graduated at the University of Southern California, and he really played a big role in this theory, in which his theory of second language acquisition is widely known and widely used by teachers, especially in second language researchers. So, Krashen's theory of second language acquisition consists of 5 hypotheses. So what are these? First, we have the acquisition learning hypothesis. Second, we have the monitor hypothesis. Third, input hypothesis. Fourth, affective filter hypothesis. And the last one, we have the natural order hypothesis. So from these 5 hypotheses, let us first discuss what is acquisition learning hypothesis. So the acquisition learning distinction is the most fundamental of the 5 hypotheses in Krashen's theory of second language acquisition, and it is the most widely known among linguistics and language teachers. According to Krashen, there are 2 independent systems of foreign language performance. We have the acquired system, which is the first one, and the second one is the learned system. So what are the differences of these 2 systems? The acquired system is, or we can also call this as the acquisition, is the product of the subconscious process. Subconscious means involuntary. Very similar to the process children undergo when they acquire their first language. So acquisition or the acquired system is the same as those students or those children who first learn their first language. So since it's subconscious process, that means it requires meaningful interaction in the target language, natural communication in which speakers are concentrated not in the form of their utterances, but in the communicative act. And the second one is the learning system, or learning, as the product of formal instruction. Take note of that. Formal instruction, and it comprises a conscious process, unlike with the acquired system, which is subconscious. This one is a conscious process, which results in conscious knowledge about the language. For example, knowledge of grammar rules, or those knowledge that we've learned in school. Those are part of the learning system. According to Krashen, learning is less important than acquisition. So we can say that acquisition is more of the long-term side, unlike with the learned one, since we tend to forgot about those details related to it. Second, we have the monitor hypothesis. Explains the relationship between acquisition and learning and defines the influence of the latter on the former. So the relationship between those two that I've mentioned earlier is the job of the monitor hypothesis, their relationship. The monitoring function is the practical result of the learned grammar. According to Krashen, the acquisition system is the utterance initiator. So, unlike with the learned system, it is the monitor or the editor. Monitor acts in planning, editing, and correcting function when 3 specific conditions are met. First, we have the second language learner has sufficient time at their disposal. So it really needs an ample time. Second, they focus on form or think about correctness. Since if you think on the negative side, you won't learn something or you can't monitor something. And the last one we have, they know the rule. This is the most important one. They need to know the rule in order to meet the monitor hypothesis in part of Krashen's second language acquisition.
It appears that the role of conscious learning is somewhat limited in second language performance. According to Krashen again, the role of the monitor is minor. I'll give emphasis to this, minor. being used only to correct deviations from normal speech and to give speech a more polished appearance. So monitor is there to make something more polished, but it is always the acquired system the more important one. Question also suggests that there is individual variation among language learners with regard to monitor use. He distinguishes those learners that use the monitor all the time, or those are the people we can call overusers. Those learners who have not learned or who prefer not to use their conscious knowledge, they are called underusers. And those learners that use the monitor appropriately, they are called the optimal users. And on the evaluation of the person's psychological profile, it can also help determine to what group they belong. For example, we have the extroverts, they are underusers, while introverts and perfectionists are overusers, since from the word itself they are perfectionists, so they tend to overuse the monitor hypothesis. And lack of confidence is frequently related to overuse of the monitor. Next, the third one is the input hypothesis. Is Krashen's attempt to explain how the learner acquires a second language. How second language acquisition takes place. So more like input hypothesis focuses on the how part. The input hypothesis is only concerned with acquisition, not learning. Take note. Acquisition, not learning. According to this hypothesis, the learner improves and progresses along the natural order. We'll discuss this, what is natural order, on the last part. When he or she receives second language input that is one step beyond his or her current stage of linguistic competence. Since not all learners can be at the same level of linguistic competence at the same time, Krashen suggests that natural communicative input is a key to designing a syllabus, ensuring in this way that each learner will receive an input that is appropriate to his or her current stage of linguistic competence. Fourth one, the affective filter hypothesis embodies Krashen's view that a number of affective variables play a facilitative but non-causal role in second language acquisition. These variables include motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, and personality traits. Krashen claims that learners with high motivation, self-confidence, a good self-image, a low level of anxiety, and extroversion are better equipped for success in second language acquisition. So confidence really plays a big role in this part. The opposite of the positive things I've mentioned earlier can raise the affective filter and form a mental block that prevents comprehensible input from being used for acquisition. So it is really a big problem if you have a low self-esteem or even a low self-motivation, since it could result to mental block. On the other hand, positive effect is necessary but not sufficient on its own for acquisition to take place. So you can't just rely on the positive effect. There's more than that in order for an acquisition to take place. Finally, the less important, natural order. I've mentioned this earlier on the input hypothesis. Natural order hypothesis suggests that the acquisition of grammatical structures follows a natural order which is predictable. For a given language, one grammatical structure tend to be acquired early while the others late, so it's not really the same. These orders seem to be independent of the learner's age, background, conditions of exposure, and although the agreement between individual acquires was not always 100% in the studies, there were statistically significant similarities that reinforce the existence of a natural order of language acquisition. Krushin, however, points out that the implication of the natural order hypothesis is not a language program syllabus should be based on the order found in the studies. In fact, he rejects grammatical sequencing when the goal is language acquisition. So Krushin rejects the grammatical sequencing and when we focus on the language acquisition as our goal. Let's do a wrap up of the things that I've mentioned, the 5 hypotheses of Krushin's theory of second language acquisition. First, we have the acquisition learning hypothesis, which has 2 systems, which is the acquired system that is a product of a subconscious process, and learned system, which is a product of a conscious process. Second, we have the monitor, which focuses on the learned system, and then we have the input, which focuses on the acquired or on the acquisition part. The 4th hypothesis is affective filter hypothesis, in which it plays a big role in the second language acquisition, and the last one, which is less important, the natural order. The only instance in which the teaching of grammar can result in language acquisition and proficiency is when the students are interested in the subject matter and the target language is used as a medium of instruction. So, the student itself and also the teacher played a big role in language acquisition, especially in acquiring our second language. And since we are Filipinos and we have our mother tongue, it is really important to point out that we need ourselves, we need to have a motivation to learn second language, which is English, and we also need the teacher's ideas, the teacher's expertise in this field in order for us to learn something important. So that could be all. Thank you so much.
Good day, everyone. Now we will take a look about the Kachur's 3 concentric circles model. So for today, this will be the assigned topic for us to discuss this thoroughly. But before that, let me discuss to you the significance of this study or this topic. As we all know, English language is now indispensable in all transnational aspects of life, including technology, commerce, telecommunication, medicine, and as a way of communication across culture in many countries and regions. As the Brim and Bayer 2000 stated, it is undeniable fact that English has become a global lingua franca. It is the most commonly spoken foreign language, language of media, language of technology, and language of science. The globalization of English and the necessity of knowing English creates a great need for better understanding the relationship of the language and its native speakers' culture, and a great need for searching for the best possible ways to improve ENL, ESL, and EFL towards the global world. The revolutionary spread of English over the globe, which took place over the last decades, has created changes in the sociolinguistic profiles of the language and provided new varieties of English, rather. Nowadays, English is not only a tool of communication among native speakers but also a language institutionalized in many former British and American colonies, and a lingua franca used all around the world. So whenever you will travel around different countries, so the language that you are going to use is the English language, since it is considered now as our universal language. This fact has resulted in a great concern of the classification of word Englishes. In addition to the need to familiarize English language teaching to its new status, one of the ways to understand and study this phenomenon is according to this Cature's three concentric circle model, since this model is represent the spread of the language, which is the English language. So, but before that, let me classify the classification of English language. So we have here the three groups of users. First, the E and L stands for English as native language, ESL, English as second language, EFL, English as foreign language. So let's talk about the the biography of Raj Kakchu. He is an Indian linguist who coined the term World English. He is the founder of the International Association of World Englishes, and of course, who proposed the Kakchu's three concentric circle model during the mid 1980s. So, I will let you see the illustration of the three concentric circle model for you to visualize and understood easily. So in the middle part, the small circle which is located in the middle part, it is labeled as the inner circle. Then outside the inner circle, second one is labeled as the outer circle. And lastly, the the big circle, the last is the expanding circle. So first, let me introduce to you the inner circle. The inner circle represents the countries where English is the primary language and is used in daily life and government institution. So these are the countries that are located or belong to that inner circle, such as the United States of America or the USA, the United Kingdom or the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Moreover, English in these countries are classed as a first language, so it is considered as a primary language or a first language, since where the English language as it is the as it is the historical birth or of English language. Thus, the countries found in this circle, the English language is their mother tongue, since it is considered as their first language. Then, in inner circle, the total number or English speakers is estimated around 380 million. So there are 380 million English speakers, since it is seen that it is small in a circle, so it is only estimated around 380 million. And then inner circle, it is a norm providing. It is a norm providing. This means that English language norms are developed in this country and spread outwards. Thus, it is considered as a norm providing. An, an inner circle considered as well as English as native language. Since I have um, mentioned earlier that the English speaker in this country are use mother tongue, and the language of those born and raised, and the language used in that country which are located in inner circle, the language of those born and raised in one of the countries where English is historically the first language to be spoken. So it is considered as their mother tongue. So that's all for today. So the other types of three concentric three concentric circle model will be discussed by my other group mates.
Going to continue Angelica's discussion about outer circle. The concentric circles signifies the type of spread partners of acquisition and functional domains in which English language is used across cultures and languages. The expanding circles, usually the inner and outer circles, includes the country that introduced English as a foreign language and education mainly for the purpose of communicating. Such countries include Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Japan, Korea, and others. The Cashews model tends to focus on native speaker fluency as an international communication in English. However, this can be challenged by the growing numbers of researchers who problematize the idea of native users' ownership of English. The outer circles includes countries that have British colonial ties, and English is widely used in social life and government sector. Most of the countries that belong to this circle are former colonies of the British Empire, such as India, Malaysia, and Singapore. China, Kenya, and others. This country uses English as their second language, as well as the Philippines. If a language is not subject to ownership, but is rather to be learned and used, the ownership of English bears global features. It is not the native speaker's monopoly that they can decide to keep or pass on to others. This could relate to what Cashew 2005 says in his later publication entitled Whose English Is It? Ancient Englishes Beyond the Canon. Currently, there is significant growing call for accepting variations from native standards as norms in non-native Englishes. Jenkins 2006 strongly believes that some deviations from native norms in English as lingua franca users be interpreted as signs of creativity. So, outer circle is made up of post-colonial countries in which English, though not the mother tongue, has for a significant period of time played an important role in education, governance, and popular culture. The outer circle of English was produced by the second diaspora of English. The second diaspora of English is found in countries such as India and parts of the Africa. Countries which were historically colonized at one time or other by Britain, one of the native-speaking English countries, which spread the language through imperial expansion by Great Britain in Asia and Africa. In these regions, English is not the native tongue, but serves as useful lingua franca. The lingua franca is the language used by a group of people in order to establish a communication. It is also being adopted as common language between speakers whose native languages are different. So, for example, is when people met and they're from different countries, like the other one is from the Philippines and the other one is from Thailand. And in order for them to understand each other's side, they need to speak the native language, which is the English. Like between ethnic and language group, countries in the outer circle includes India, Nigeria, Pakistan, the Philippines, Singapore, South Africa, and more than other 50 nations.
Cut through three concentric circles model of English language has its three parts. The first one is the inner circle. The second one is the outer circle. The third one is the expanding circle. For now, I am going to discuss the last part, which is the expanding circle. Expanding circle is defined as comprising those areas when English is an international language and traditionally regarded as society learning in English as a foreign language. English as foreign language. These are non-native speakers who learn English in a country where English is not usually spoken. It includes the rest of the world where English is used as primary foreign language. In addition, it is made up by English foreign language speakers where English is also not usually spoken. In this circle, the speakers have to follow the rules established by the inner and developed or challenged by the outer one. Expanding Circle was never colonized by British Empire, and therefore English is not language spoken by a significant number of people in the country. English does not have a restricted official status nor major domestic functions. Instead, English is mainly taught as a subject and used for international communication. There are countries where English is learned and treated as a foreign language. In this country, English is considered as a tool needed to communicate in global environment. Expanding circles includes countries that introduces English as foreign language in schools and universities, mostly for communicating in English with the inner and outer circles. These countries are Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Japan, China, Korea, Europe, Brazil, France, Greece, Italy, Poland, and Wanda. These countries belong to expanding circles for the reason that they do not usually speak English as their native language. They considered English language as their foreign language. On the other hand, English is spoken, but where it does not necessarily have a colonial history or primary or official status. All in all, Cartier's model has had a lot of importance in the history of socio-linguistics. However, it also shows some problems that need to be solved in order to include all the speakers of English language.